I do the usual apologies to begin with. I have had an apology from Councillor Golby, but no others. I don't know if anyone can help on that.
That's all the apologies we've received, Chair. We also have the leader and portfolio holder for finance watching on YouTube. Okay, thank you for that. Moving on then. In terms of the minutes of the last meetings, starting at page 1, if I could just go page by page. Page 1, any comments from anyone? No. On page 2, I do note on there that there were some additional questions that I asked at the previous meeting, and I know that Stuart, as Director of Finance, has provided answers to all committee members on that, so hopefully or they met people's satisfaction. So that's page 2. Anything on page 3 or page 4? I'm happy to accept them as a true record. Can someone perhaps just second that?
I'll do that, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. Item 3, deputations and public addresses. I've not received anything there. I haven't received any declarations of interest. No, and I haven't heard of any matters of urgency. Okay, so let's move on to item 6, which is the internal audit update from BDO. I assume we'll go straight into Gurpreet on that. So Gurpreet, over to you, if you can update us on your report.
Brilliant, thanks. So on the third page of the paper, which is page 3 of the actual report, but page 7 of the packs, just gives a bit of a summary. So there was one outstanding report from 1920, which is safeguarding, which is now complete, which I'll talk about because you have the exec summary for that. And then I'll also give an update on the 2020-2021 plan. So the following 2 pages are the summary table. So on page 8 of the overall pack, it just sets out there the moderate limited opinion for safeguarding, so moderate on design and limited on effectiveness, and we'll come on to that. And then on the following page, the next table is just a summary of the 2020-2021 plan. And in answer, I guess, to Councillor Stone's question, you'll see on there, kind of halfway down that table, it says Social Lettings Agency. You can see the opinion in draft for that, and management have come back with their comments, so that will be final and issued, so it will come to the next committee. And also on MPH there, the 4th row down, you can see there's a review that's currently ongoing with that one, and again that will come to the March committee, so those 2 areas are covered. There's a couple of other audits in the plan around climate change or climate emergency. That report is almost finalised. It's just I think it's going to be issued to the head of service today, but we've had a closing meeting, and the licensing one I think is still going on. So it's slightly too early on that one, but we have no concerns that we should be able to deliver all of these for the if it is the March committee. So then we've finished our work then for the end of the year. So I guess before just going into the safeguarding one, are there any questions in terms of progress and process? Obviously, it's worth noting as well, which we have on what is page 7 of your packs, just changes to the plan that have been made. So there is an additional review around health and safety that's come in, which is going to be commencing this week. Kind of the council's arrangements to ensure that MPH are meeting their requirements in terms of health and safety across the portfolio. So that's an additional one that's come in. And in bringing that in, we've removed the HMO licensing and enforcement review. So before I go into safeguarding, if there's any questions on either the 1920 or 2020-2021 plan.
No, I'm not hearing any.
Could we just be told what it means on the Social Lettings Agency limited draft? Limited.
That means our opinion that has been issued with the draft report is limited.
Oh, right.
So that's draft, and Obviously, management will have to review that and confirm that they agree with that opinion or challenge it in any way. My feeling is that it won't be challenged from seeing the responses that we've picked up today, but obviously that's why we've put draft after that, but it's just to give you a heads up that it's likely to be a limited opinion on both, on the design and on the effectiveness.
With the commensurate recommendations?
Yes, yeah, there's, I can't remember exactly how many findings and recommendations there are, but there's a few, and obviously some of them are high, hence the overall opinion is limited.
Okay, I'll have a look at that. Thank you. And you're talking about the safeguarding one. Okay.
Yes, yeah. So safeguarding, this is a, it was an outstanding one from 1920. There was a delay in this one, not due to BDO. The service area wanted the review to commence a little bit later, and then COVID happened and it got a little bit further delayed in the process, but we completed the work. So you see we have a design of moderate but an effectiveness of limited. So as you'll know, as an authority, you have responsibility or some responsibilities for safeguarding. Ultimate responsibility sits with the county, but as part of your arrangements, there are certain things that you need to do to show as an authority that you're either identifying roles within the council where people might be engaging with vulnerable people or people who might be vulnerable to kind of safeguarding issues. And generally how that's done is through council-wide mandatory training to make sure that there are certain levels of compliance so that people are aware of what kind of things to look out for, how to report things where they should be reported. And that's, the training's largely done for a software called Pacificus. I don't know if I've got that pronunciation right, but that's the training platform. There is quite a bit of good practice, which we've put in the report, which is on page 11 of the overall pack, 7 of the individual report. You know, there are the right policies in place. There are arrangements to kind of report things. We've seen reporting to SMT where needed, if there were any kind of particular gaps or particular cases to be referred and discussions to happen. There are safeguarding champions, and that's why from a design perspective we said things are moderate, but from an effectiveness perspective there's a high finding around lower levels of compliance and training. So there is a safeguarding vulnerable adults and safeguarding children e-learning module. The average compliance rate was just under 55%. There were some areas which were below 35%, so it's a lot lower than we would like to see in terms of training across an authority. And there's also the second high finding is around a report that the council need to do every year. It's called a Section 11 report. So the council complete this. There's certain kind of boxes that you have to give a position statement on to the county council. So they ask things around training and policies and are these in place, and you have to fill this in. It's a self-assessment, so council fills it in, sends it to the county. And we looked at these Section 11 reports between 2017 and 2019-20, and there are areas the council deemed not met in 2017, which are still not met in 2019-20. So from a kind of effectiveness position, the council are not demonstrating necessarily a strong ability to close out the actions that they themselves recognised were not meeting the requirements that they should have in place from 3 years ago to now. And so therefore we've placed that as a high as well. There's then a series of mediums and there's a low as well with 8 findings in total. So largely due to the training and the Section 11 kind of governance and seeing through those actions not being as strong as we'd like, we've deemed the effectiveness as limited, and that's the reasons for the opinion. So I'll pause there and happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Gurpreet. Maybe if I can just start on this, and I think Stuart will probably want to add comments as well. In terms of your report, obviously safeguarding is an important and a sensitive area, and having a design as moderate and then limited effectiveness isn't a great position to be in. And just so that members are aware, I've spoken to Gurpreet on the back of that when I first received the papers, And I know that Gurpreet is outstanding a response from management of the organisation, and that needs to come quickly. Now, it's at this point it's probably best to bring Stuart in, because I think Stuart has got a bit of an insight into what's likely to be coming down the line. So perhaps Stuart, if you wouldn't mind picking this one up.
Thank you, Chair. So the director responsible couldn't make it this evening, and I do have a specific statement from them, and they send their apologies to the committee for the delay in responding to the recommendations in the audit. Although the audit has highlighted examples of good practice, it's also identified some areas that require urgent and significant improvement. To address these, they'll be producing a comprehensive management response and action plan no later than the 8th of January 2021. I've also conducted a review of the number of people that have been assessed as mandatory for the course, and I think there's something about understanding how many members should do it as mandatory and how many could do it, as it's useful to know. I think possibly we've got a bit of a balance as to the course allocation has been over mandatory, for want of a better phrase, and we're also in the process of changing the e-learning provider, so it's no longer the one that Gurpreet was trying to explain. It's a different one as of now, but yes, we will provide a further update at the next audit committee.
Thanks, Stuart. And that swiftness of response is obviously critical here. And clearly, I guess, from Gurpreet's perspective, he'll want to see, an appropriately rigorous response there as well. So we will keep close tabs on this, and we'll hear as a committee if there's anything adrift in due course. I'm conscious that I've sort of hogged that report a little bit to begin with Stuart's help. So just to open it up, are there any other questions that people want to raise in terms of this particular issue? Councillor Stone.
I was so disappointed when I saw this report. Thank you for bringing it to us, because clearly this is one of our most important duties, is to make sure that vulnerable adults and children are safe in our town. So I understand, the processes are at fault, the procedures, the monitoring, the management of that. In a way, what's more important is, has it had an adverse impact on vulnerable adults and children? Or is it, something that's made our position in that regard weak, but it hasn't actually had an adverse impact as yet? Has it had an adverse impact?
I would imagine, and it's probably one more for the head of service to answer, obviously, being his area. From our audit perspective, that's a question we cannot answer. I think what I can say is, obviously, the actual ownership of safeguarding across the area is with the county council. Obviously, they have their adult and children's safeguarding boards. They are responsible, they receive referrals, they assign staff to then do investigations depending on that. As part of that flow, if you like, any intel that they can get, whether it's from members of the public who raise referrals or districts within the area who raise concerns, whether, so if your staff are all fully trained where it's required and they know what the triggers are to look for, the kind of information that they should be referring, if they're aware of that and refer it, that can help an investigation that the county can do. So in answer to your question, it would be impossible, I think, to probably answer that, even possibly from the head of service point of view. But anything further that a district can do to raise intelligence through the safeguarding process is obviously going to help any case that happens should there be something, because, as you'll always know, when something goes wrong, quite often there's, when something does happen, it's, well, look at all the people who have been in contact with this person and something has broken down. Obviously, the more people who can be involved in something, the more intel that the end investigator can have. So I think that question would be impossible to answer for anybody, but the stronger you can make those controls, the more likely it is that you're contributing to mitigating safeguarding concerns going missed or enacted upon.
Lovely, thank you.
Yeah, I've got another one.
Me?
Right, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's Les. Okay.
You look very clear. Yeah, I know it's Les. You look very clear. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. I think my name's on there as well. I just wondered, because you have mentioned on a couple of occasions about the overall responsibilities for the county council. Given the fact that we're another arm of public service, doesn't the actual county council lead on it in any way? I just wonder why, looking at internally, we're looking at our internal audit, aren't they got a role to play themselves at looking internally ourselves to make sure we are doing the right thing on the borough? Probably parish councils and the like as well, or any other public body. Isn't there any sort of role they play in that, to make sure that, it doesn't come to the fact that we need an internal audit, the fact that they can actually look at what other organisations are doing, particularly in the public sector, to see that they're doing it up to the standards that we should be doing it up to.
The mechanism to do that is this Section 11 report, as I understand. So the district council have to complete a Section 11 report, which goes to the Adults and Children Safeguarding Board on the county, and that sets out, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert in this area, so it's one for the head of service. As I understand it, it has all these different criteria, such as, do you have this policy, yes or no? Do you have training? What's your compliance rates? Have you identified staff who might need heightened training? And there's a whole load of tabs and areas that you need to complete. Obviously, once you complete that self-assessment, it goes off to the county. I would assume that somebody on their side reviews it, and if they're not happy, that they would then check, well, why are you not doing what we'd expect you to do? And that would bridge the gap with what you're saying. What we've done from our perspective is to look at those Section 11 returns, and what we've seen is in 2017, the council have found 12 or 13 areas which they, as in the borough council, have determined not met or not achieved. We then looked at those same areas, I think, in the 2019-20 return, and seen that a number of them are still not met or not delivered, despite the 2017 one saying, we should have actioned these in the next 12 months. And so from our perspective, we're saying something there clearly isn't working, because there are things the council are identifying and not progressing. In terms of the county and how they then hold the council to account, and does somebody check and challenge? I don't know. I don't know how strong that process is. You could argue maybe it's not as strong as it should be. Otherwise, maybe it would have challenged these areas, but I'm not sure.
That's a point I'm making, really, because obviously you can understand the trouble the county council got into on these issues, and clearly they weren't doing the job from our point of view either, by the sound of it. But okay, well, thanks for that. Cheers.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions on this paper? Obviously, we'll watch with interest in terms of the response in due course, but are we okay to move on from the safeguarding issue? Yep, okay. I think it's back to you, Dupree.
Okay, and then the other report or summary, which just follows that exec summary, is, as you may be aware, the government set up a new scheme that if you are self-isolating and your income levels are of a certain level or below, or circumstances meet certain criteria, you can be entitled to a £500 payment if you're self-isolating, and local authorities, boroughs and districts have to administer this. So this came in, I think, late September. So the scheme runs from the 28th of September 2020 to the 31st of January 2021. Obviously, it may change in terms of the scheme and the length, etc., but that's, as I understand, the current position. The council received this instruction from the government in September and had to have a platform and arrangements in place for around, I think, about the 12th of October, so that people, if they were self-isolating and meeting that criteria, could go on and apply for this funding. The council then have to do their checks and balances to ensure that, yes, they meet the criteria, and obviously disperse the payment to whoever it may be who's self-isolating. So that scheme is still going on. So all districts and boroughs or even unitaries had to administer this, and it had to be done at a very quick speed and pace, is fair to say. So as part of that process, we were asked to look at the arrangements the council have, or were intending to put in place, to make sure that they could process these correctly in line with the criteria, and then tested a few of the early cases. So the arrangements in place were largely sound, and you see in the outcome there, when we did our initial testing of some of those cases, we did find that there were some errors or some areas where we thought maybe the guidance isn't being applied fully correctly. However, the council then took on board some of the recommendations that we suggested and some of the changes that we put forward, which is in the recommendations piece there, such as updating a template to capture more information in the first place. They were quickly put into place, and then when we retested those cases and a further few cases, we found that we were then kind of happy that the arrangements in place were processing these correctly. And it's probably what we expected. A lot of councils at speed were having to put these new arrangements in place. And so there's likely to be some areas where we would recommend improvements. We've recommended them, and to our knowledge, they've been put into place. We've retested and they're operating. So generally, we're happy that the discretionary award for the self-isolation grant is operating, operating reasonably and following the criteria for those early cases that we looked at.
Okay. Thank you for that. You want to pause there? Any questions? No, I'm not hearing any. Okay, Gurpreet, can you continue?
Yeah. We have the sector update there. I won't necessarily pick up anything on there, but if there's anything you wish to ask about, then please let me know. And then following the sector update is the follow-up report, which is page 23 of your packs. So you have the normal tables at the front, which just summarizes 2018-19 review areas and how many of those are kind of overdue or removed or complete, and same with 19-20. I think it's probably more useful to look at page 25, which is the narrative summary. So the 28 recommendations due December 2020 or earlier. November 2020 or earlier. And as you can see in the bullet points just halfway down that page, it just summarizes how many of those are complete. So the 12 high and 4 medium fully completed. There are quite a few which were not completed. 2 of those which are high, 10 which are medium, but a number of them have revised dates on them now. What we have done in this follow-up is just added in a different category, and that is moved to new unitary, because these are ones which are not likely to be complete before the 31st of March, so they'll go forward to the new organisation. And so we've put a category for those as well. It's clear that obviously there is good progress on those ones which were complete, and I think given the position you're in and many authorities in terms of COVID impacting completion dates and when things may be done, it's quite challenging, and to have the split that you have is probably reasonably in line with others. In terms of how many are complete and how many are pushed back. I think come our next committee, so if that is in March, we will give a full and final position, which is here's the follow-up of everything, and we may, and I'll discuss this with Joe, just give a position statement on every recommendation, whether it was due or not, or if it had a later date, just so we can say this is the final position on every recommendation. And obviously Joe and Karen and others would take that forward after that, and that would be kind of our final position then on where things are with follow-up. So happy to take any questions, and that would include safeguarding as the one we've just talked about. If we have our response on the 8th of Jan, we'll do a follow-up for the March committee and say here's the latest position, but obviously the unitary will need to take that forward.
Okay. Sorry, have I got someone that wants to come in? Didn't see a hand. No.
Yes, I do.
Okay, let's. Councillor Stone, do you want to go first?
Well, there are 2 things that are really bothering me. On temporary accommodation, I know a huge amount of work has been done. So these dates, the due dates, are a movable feast. I would have thought there was some really good reporting to be had there. So I suppose the question is, when are we going to get a completion on that one? And then the other one is, I'm really, really disturbed about the disabled facilities grant, because we've been trying to keep an eye on that over a period of time, and I know other people outside of this committee have as well. And this seems to be an area that's, it's just, in the scale of things, it's a small budget, but it's high impact, isn't it? And if it doesn't get spent properly, or you know, we don't meet the targets on that one, it has a huge impact on people not being able to leave hospital, not being able to return home, and all of that kind of stuff. So what's going to be happening with that one?
So just on those two, temporary accommodation from the summary table at the beginning shows that 100% of the recommendations are complete, which probably mirrors the additional activities you mentioned in that area. So there's nothing that we're reporting here that is complete. We've either judged them as complete in the past. So there's, from our original one, there's nothing outstanding on those ones. On disabled facilities, in that table at the beginning of the report, we're saying 81% of the recommendations that we originally raised are complete. And there's 2 which are outstanding. So I guess just to provide that balance, there are 81% of the ones that we originally raised are complete, and the 2 which are outstanding are a couple of areas which are noted further down in the report, which we'll follow up for the March meeting. So there is progress on those ones. They're just not on the disabled facilities one. There's 8 or 9 which have been done, and 2 which are still outstanding.
Okay, thanks.
I think Stuart might have wanted to come in, particularly on the DFG one, I think.
So notwithstanding the actual audit report, DFG's suffered quite a lot this year because of COVID, not through a lack of willingness, but it's actually proved trickier to get in people's homes to do those adjustments and do the assessments. So they're still ongoing in year, and we're very keen to use the budget for all the reasons Councillor Stone says, but COVID has caused some restrictions in how fast we can actually do some of that activity. That's the nature of the year, but that doesn't mean we won't seek to catch up on it as soon as we can.
Thank you, Stuart. Can I just mention a couple of things, Capri? First of all, your sort of offer of a stock take, for want of a better expression, in March before everything closes down, I think is a really helpful suggestion. So it would be useful to have a position there. The other couple of things I was going to ask, and I'm not sure whether they're targeted at yourself or Stuart, was going back to your sort of wider sector updates. There's a couple of items in there that'd be useful to get your take on. First of all, there's one in relation to COVID-19 and fighting fraud, and it's what the the council has in place to ensure that we're doing all we possibly can to guard against fraud. And the second one is the cyber attack on Redcar and Cleveland Council. And again, it's just whether there is anything in terms of the council's position to avoid as much as possible our being a victim of such an attack. I don't know, I could see Stuart nodding his head. So Stuart, do you want to kick off on that? And if Capri wants to come in, then that's fine.
So firstly, COVID-19, the fraud side. When we first launched the grants, we were alleged to be slower than others. And part of the reason for that was that we had BDO checking every grant, because although the instruction was get the money out, actually it was a lot of money for us. So we pushed out nearly 35 million in the first rounds of grants. And we're fairly fortunate that we're not suffering the post-grant issuing fraud issues that many authorities did. So part of our prevention is that as you've heard on the test and trace, we are actively using BDO to check that we've got a proper process. Now we're using the commercial portal. It helps capture the data in a more rigorous way. We're much more cautious about the questions. We have better data, and BDO then verify the processes, but also our decision making. So if we exercise discretion, test and trace has two forms. One is a straight entitlement, and the second one is a hardship payment, where there's actually a human decision, and we seek guidance from BDO as to are we consistent and approaching it in the right way? And so all the discretionary business grants, again, we seek advice from BDO on our control mechanisms to make sure we're consistent, fair and appropriate. Many of the grants that we issue are actually administrative, so the we call them the November lockdown grants. We administer a lot of grants, and at the moment we're still trying to process and get more businesses to engage for those that were legally required to close during November. And those are the grants that are 1,334, 2,000 or 3,000. So we use a commercial portal that does I won't go into too many checks and balances, but it does an awful lot of sector checks and balances that BDO did for us manually before. But we then use BDO to make sure that the portal's compliant. And we work, because we're an early adopter, we actually work quite closely with the portal company to help them get the flow and the decision making proper. So I can't say we won't suffer any fraud with that many millions going through fairly ad hoc processes. We've been refining them. Some of the businesses are discovering we're asking a lot more detail, but that's because government has realised it suffered nationally a lot of fraud. So we are being forced to ask for a lot more data now from businesses, and it's quite specific what we must have. So we are fairly comfortable that we are as good as we can be. Again, if you take the test and trace payments of £500, it's not in anybody's interest to spend £1,000 per application because it is just 500. So it's about getting the level of control appropriate so that people can apply, can get it in an appropriate time, and we minimise and mitigate fraud risk as best we can. In terms of the cyber side, we are aware of the issues that the other council had, and most councils have been briefed specifically on that attack. We work very closely with what is ex-LGSS IT through NCC, who host a number of systems. Many of our services are provided through Microsoft Clouds and other things. So we are as defended as we can be as a local authority.
Yeah, and it's probably worth just adding that I think, to the best of my recollection, BDO did a cyber review last year, which I think had a positive assurance. So it was a moderate and above. It may have had even a substantial in there. I can't quite recall, but it was definitely, it wasn't limited from my memory of that. I'm not a cyber expert myself, but we have done a review in this 12 months ago or so, and it was positive on the fraud side. Similarly, I agree with Stuart in that I think what the council have done is to target against what the big bits of fraud could be, like the grants that have gone out and distributed. On the wider fraud stuff around day-to-day kind of benefit distribution or financial controls, that's more LGSS's remit than BDO. We don't necessarily tend to review those areas. It's more the reports you get from them. So it may be something Jacinta has a comment on, but that's probably less so for us.
Thank you for that. Thanks for your comments, Stuart, on that as well. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of Gurpreet's report. Just to say thank you for the report, Gurpreet. It's always good to have such a robust paper, and please pass on my thanks to your team as well, because I'm conscious it's not a one-man show in terms of this, but yeah, many thanks for that. That's it's been really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if we move on to item 7, where I think we're into still on the audit theme, but with LGSS. So we've got Jacinta joining us to present this. Jacinta, can I hand it over to you for a few words by way of introduction?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I can just go through the report. Firstly, in terms of the 2019-20 reviews, well, we have made some small progress, and I think we would have liked to have made more. If I can just take committee through sort of the Aggresso review, which is currently at draft stage. We have had some responses from officers, but not all the sort of recommendations that we raised, we've had the responses just as yet. we are hopeful that we will be able to finalise that this week. In terms of the findings, and it's interesting from the sort of discussions that have just gone on before, what we found as our main conclusions was that obviously the infrastructure for Aggresso is hosted at the Guildhall. And at the time of the review, what we were finding was that there was no evidence that the backups which are held at Bridge Depot were actually being tested on a regular basis. And that, in line with the disaster recovery arrangements, we didn't find evidence at the time that testing was being done on a regular basis. And as a result of that, the assurance at the moment is showing on compliance as satisfactory, but we're looking to move that to a limited assurance on that, because we're hoping that we would find more evidence to sort of negate what we thought we were finding, and that's not come through just yet. We also identified that patching arrangements across the Aggresso servers were not sort of as frequent, or there wasn't a set arrangement for patching up the servers for Aggresso. So again, it was a question of what evidence did they have. It may well be that these were being done, but we found no evidence of a set pattern of patching issues across the server for Aggresso. I don't know if there are any questions on that one.
Can I just come in on that in terms of, I know you're describing it as draft, those sort of initial conclusions you've drawn, have management had an opportunity to come back to you on that?
On some of the findings, we've had responses from managers, but on the two key ones that I've flagged up, we had discussed it with NBC managers and they had accepted those findings. At the time, we were seeking clarification from either LGSS or Northampton County Council, and that's where we're at the moment. We just need clarification as to where the responsibility actually lies at the moment. I don't know if Stuart wants to come in on this. At the time when we were doing the work, LGSS was sort of running it for NBC, but it was being hosted at Bridge Depot by the County Council.
Okay.
Sorry
to cut you off. Stuart, do you want to come in at this point?
So as Jacinta knows, the whole of our IT is outsourced to LGSS, what was, and is now NCC IT. There is no NBC IT. And although the servers are physically in the Guildhall and Westbridge Depot, that's a physical location rather than a responsibility. Haven't seen the report as the recipient and the responsible person for CFO and IT. When I do get it, I will take up the matter with the Director of IT in NCC, who's responsible for delivering the service.
Okay. Thanks, Stuart. In terms of process, clearly that has to take place first. So as a committee, we'll wait for the overall reporting, and if we've got any particular questions on that, we'll have an opportunity to ask at a future session. Going back to, sorry, Jacinta, but in terms of your report, do you want to continue from where you were before?
Yes, okay. As regards the financial audits, we had started work, and I think it was reported at last committee that we'd started work on the treasury management and the general ledger audits. But we've taken a decision to restart these audits again, primarily because obviously there's been a long time since a lag of time with COVID, but also the sort of change in delivery arrangements. Earlier in the year, the finance function went from LGSS back to the County Council. And I know it's got kind of more services moved recently, but quite earlier on in the year, the finance function did sort of get pulled back into the County Council. So whereas previously when we started the work, the service was being delivered by LGSS, halfway through the year, delivery got moved back into NCC offices doing the delivery. So we took a decision to restart. Again, delivery has been impacted by the fact that officers are very busy, and it's been really difficult trying to agree starting times for these audits within the finance function. So we have struggled in terms of progressing this. But I am happy to say, as I report to you now, we have agreed starting times and an arrangement where, to minimise disruption, we're deciding that we will do the Borough Council's reviews, General Ledger and Treasury Management reviews, the same time as we're looking at the County Council's arrangements. And planning has started on delivering of those. And hopefully by next committee, we should be coming to you with at least a draft report, hopefully. But I think the changes that I've been going through with LGSS and the County Council has definitely impacted our ability to progress work on this. Moving on to the 2021 reviews, I think we've made slightly better progress on these. But again, on this one, the acceleration of sort of preparation for moving to unitary, it has impacted on our ability to actually start more audits. But we've been able to do the council tax review, which it shows there at draft stage. In this instance, there were no significant issues highlighted from this review. And we did go back, Chair, to look at some of the transactions for 1920, which I think I said we would do at last committee. And again, there weren't any significant issues identified from that review. The bank rec reviews that we've done for Q1 and Q2 and are progressing for Q3. Our review has confirmed that reconciliations are being completed regularly. They are subject to review by a senior officer who is independent of preparation of the reconciliations. The main issue that we're finding, and it's an ongoing issue, are unreconciled payroll transactions that we're talking to management at the moment and looking to see what actions they're taking to resolve those. We are hopeful, not hopeful, I think we're quietly confident that we will be achieving this plan this year, Chair. And I know we've said this before, and hopefully, you know, COVID and all the other changes that are going through would not overly hinder our progress. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Jacinta. Can I just ask, Stuart, can I just put you on the spot? Is there anything you've heard there that you'd want to particularly comment on?
Thank you, Chair. As you're aware, whilst we appreciate the input from LGSS internal audit, we actually rely on BDO as the official internal auditor. So if myself or the governance and risk manager actually have real concerns through the risk register or through the committee, we would task BDO to do a proper detailed review. These are more management controls and provide an assurance as opposed to the full internal audit assurance.
Okay, thank you for that. One of the things you mentioned, Jacinta, was this sort of progress in terms of being in a position to give the committee a full view of the position, and notwithstanding what Stuart has said in terms of his reliance on BDO as well, it would be really useful for a March meeting to have a stock take in terms of where the work in your area is up to, and in particular, if there's anything that is outstanding, you know, a clear plan of attack in terms of how that is going to be resolved in future. Because one of the things that concerns me is if you like, the slippage on these reviews, I think can sometimes make the reviews actually more difficult than they need necessarily be. And having long gaps between internal audit assessments of systems is in my experience, not particularly good practice. So if I could say I wholeheartedly support your ambition to bring a position at the end of this financial year, that would be really helpful. I'm conscious that I've sort of hogged the details on this. Any other questions for Jacinta? Councillor Stone?
Thank you. One of the issues that we've looked at before is what happens to the intelligence around whatever area of work it is when there's a change in staff, a change in management, a change in how the service is being delivered? So I'm just a little bit anxious that at these very vulnerable times, we've got internal changes going on as well as the mega reorganisation going on. So the question is always, is there capacity to do the work? And who is holding the ring in terms of, you know, if there has to be anything handed over, how is that happening? Because we know we were really disadvantaged in the past because handovers weren't happening properly.
Okay, yeah, a very good question. I think it's fair to say a lot of people are aware of this particular issue. I'll let Stuart come in a second, because I know he does a lot of work with his successor effectively as Chief Financial Officer. But just to say, I've also had those same discussions, and I think, if you like, one of our responsibilities, I think, and I'm sure this is not written anywhere, but I'm sure we'd want to feel as if we'd done our bit to ensure that whatever was being handed over was in as good a condition as possible. So, you know, the principle you raise is absolutely sound. But perhaps if I can bring Stuart in, you can add to some of your add to that by referring to some of the detail work you've been doing, Stuart.
So in terms of the handover, most of the systems handover is actually going to be start from the ground up, in as much as we're all migrating to a new product, ERP Gold. So the experts are actually building the system from scratch based on previous incarnations of it. So a lot of work is actually going through. So the actual controls and methodologies will be developed and are being developed at the moment by all 8 councils' teams as part of the programme. So if there's an issue in our version of Aggresso, that's not being replicated going forward. So we're all adopting the same software. In terms of the handover, we're already working through LGR work streams. We have task and finish groups of officers and councillors, and we have Chief Finance Officer meetings every fortnight, at which point we cover off most of the topics, and we look at all the programme as well. There's a specific finance programme work stream, which includes the finance director from NCC, the West and the North, Section 151s, and another Section 151 as subject matter experts. So half the 151s are in on that specific programme. The rest of us contribute. One of the challenges we've got at the moment is actually trying to address all the current day activity, because most of us are trying to donate as much staff capacity as possible to constructing the new authorities local government review programme. So that does create a bit of a drain back in house. But in terms of handover, that's all part of the process. So all the staff will troop across, apart from the senior management who are in discussions and consultation at the moment. In terms of the reorganisation that Jacinta mentioned, for us as a client, actually nothing changed. LGSS demised, but the team, the responsibility for delivering those services went back in-house, in some cases to NCC. So whether somebody had an LGSS tag or an NCC tag now, it's not actually made a difference. So there may have been some crossovers in the past, but there shouldn't be some issues around some of these things. We are aware in some of the services that the demise of LGSS highlighted some weaknesses in resourcing, particularly Treasury and some of the closed down activities, and we have bolstered that as a collective. And Jean is actually on the line later on to give us an update. So, but many local authorities suffer year-end problems. It's quite a unique skill set, and you know there is churn. But I'm confident that one of my objectives for the next few months is to make sure that I do a good handover to my successor, Martin, and I regularly catch up with him at least weekly. Also on the call is Steve Clark from EY. He will also be keeping an eye on all of the Sovereign Council's closing down properly and handing over what the external auditors would expect us to do properly. And we suspect that BDO will have some involvements as well to make sure that we do what we need to. But certainly there's no reason to assume there'll be a loss in the handover, because most of the staff will be transferring.
Thank you, Stuart. Councillor Stone, did that cover off? Yeah, okay, that's fine. Sorry, any other comments on this report then? No, so thank you for that, Jacinta, and we look forward to hearing from you in the new year. Okay, if we move on to the next item then, the statement of accounts, which I suppose is a combination of Stuart and Steve Clark, who I think is with us. Stuart, can I just ask you to introduce this, or is it in fact Steve that's coming in on this?
I'll introduce you, Chair, to Jean, and it's Jean and Steve.
Jean as well. Right. Apologies, Jean.
Thank you, Chair. Just to introduce the report first of all, and then I'm sure Steve will have something further to say. Since publication of the 1920 draft accounts and the recommencement of the audit at the beginning of November, my team and the EY audit team have been working closely with the finance business partnering team and a number of sections throughout the borough. A large volume of information has been collated and passed over to EY, in addition to the information collated during the first phase of the audit earlier in the year. EY have an online portal that they use to raise requests to us, a secure portal. And when I looked this afternoon, there was a total of 475 discrete requests that have been recorded in that portal since the original commencement of the audit, which gives you an idea of the scale of the information that we are currently discussing. Of those 475, we have 33 that we're alive working on, either in the finance team or within other teams within the borough at the moment. And all other requests have been answered and returned to EY for their review. A significant proportion of the ones we are currently working on are substantially complete, and most of the information has already been handed over, and we're just finalising those requests. Officers are prioritising queries from staff members at EY who are not assigned to the audit after the Christmas break. All staff involved in the process, including the EY team, are working as hard as possible to substantially complete the fieldwork stage of the audit by Christmas, although I think we now think a small number of inquiries are expected to be carried over into the first week of the new calendar year. Once the fieldwork is complete, the next step will involve producing an updated draft of the 18-19 accounts to encompass the agreed changes. Currently, they're mostly anticipated to be presentational changes. We will also need to produce an updated version of the 1920 draft accounts to take into account the changes made in 18-19. We're continuing to hold regular meetings with the EY team to review the progress on the audit, and I believe we remain on track to agree a final version of the 18-19 accounts with EY and bring that to the audit committee for approval early in the new year.
Okay, thank you, Jean. It's perhaps best if we ask Steve to come in at this stage, and then we'll open it up for questions. Steve?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I just reiterate what Jean said. I haven't got an awful lot to add. We're working very hard. There's been a lot of work going on between both teams. To spare Jean's blushes, her and colleagues have done a very, very good job in getting hold of this, and without going over hold history, we'd have been finished 6 months ago. If we'd have got the level of kind of evidence and support that we can, but that's at least we are where we are now, and I can see a way forward much clearer than I could have done. we're working through those issues. If there's anything pops out, we will know that. We understand the timescales that the council is working to, as are all the sovereign councils. And I think probably and I know we're going to move on to, do you want me to leave 1920 until we get there?
It might be best, Steve. Let's just go with 1819.
Okay, we'll just go with 1819. Clearly the challenge that Jean and team and we all face is that they're dealing with other accounts closed down processes as well, which are probably at a similar time scale. So that's the thing that we're working with. But I think the main point is that we've got a shared plan between the relevant audit teams and closed down teams as best we can to try and get that over the line within the timescales we need to do. And clearly, soonest is best. We've got to make sure the accounts are right, but we're doing everything we can.
Okay, thank you for that. And just to reiterate what you were saying about Jean and the team, your efforts are very much appreciated, Jean. So thank you for that. Let me just stop at that point. Any questions from members of the committee regarding 1819? No, I'm not hearing any. What I am hearing is that we're reasonably confident that early in the new year we'll be in a position to see those accounts. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that happens. Shall we switch on to 1920 now? Steve or Jean, which of you wants to start this?
Yeah, I think probably I'll hand over to Jean and then just comment from kind of the audit process after Jean's gone, if that's okay.
That's fine, Jean.
Really, with 1920, the period of public inspection has run for 6 weeks. I'm not aware that we've had any contact from members of the public, and that has now lapsed. We are waiting really to conclude 1819, and then we'll need to follow through any changes from 1819 into the 1920 to produce a revised draft before the audit starts. But it is very much all effort on 1819 at the moment.
Steve, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no. Only to say that clearly we run from one audit to another. I would hope that, well, there's no hope about it because of the nature of having gone through 1819 as our first year audit. Most of the familiarisation stuff will not need to be repeated, and we'll know what we're dealing with. I am very aware, and it says in the papers, of the timescales for the closure of the council. I think in shared view that isn't going to happen by the end of March in terms of finishing off the audit. It's just not possible with the timescale and with the competing demands on Jean's team and our team and to get that over the line. And I think that's probably the main challenge. I would say is that, and I'm sure Stuart will come in here, is that as the sovereign councils finish their time frame, people will inevitably be looking to the future and have been doing so for a period of months now, and picking up new roles in the new authorities, and that's probably one of the biggest risks in this area. And that's not necessarily from a Jean's team perspective, it's just if there's any inherent knowledge that resides within officers who will maybe look to the future within NBC. And I know that's a challenge that myself and Stuart and Jean and her team have spoken about before.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, that is obviously a legitimate issue and blends in nicely with the question we had from Councillor Stone earlier, really, about this transferring across. Stuart, could you just comment just on the sort of a surety that we can take from, I guess, Jean or Jean's team being able to work post the 1st of April in the sort of new guise to enable a successful completion of this set of accounts?
So obviously NCC are the employers of our accounting finance teams, and this element will move across to the West going forward, along with our finance business partners. They will migrate across. My understanding is that EY have had some conversations with the West Section 151 along the county Section 151. My understanding is that there's an intention to build a ring fence team to specifically look after the closure. It usually is in that way for unitary migrations, because whatever happens, there would be a year closing down after the council demise by the very nature of the 31st of March. So it's not an abnormal practice, but it's one that we're probably more focused on than many. And again, the reassurance, any of our colleagues that go forward. So if you take my finance business partner team, if they work in a slightly different area of the West, they will still be available. The history is still auditable through the accounts and through all the records. So they may move on, but that doesn't mean that we won't still know where they are, and they won't still be required to answer questions. They will be West Northants employees and colleagues. But certainly the intention is to, I believe, protect a year-end close-down team to keep the consistency running.
Okay, thanks for that, Stuart. Any questions from anyone there? Brian, yeah, Brian, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Steve, looking at the report 3.13 on page 42, it was saying that from a previous meeting that an October meeting, that the audits for with yourselves working with officers to complete the audits for both 1819 and 1920 by the 31st of March. And listening to what you just said, Steve, do you say that that's not possible now?
Yeah, I don't see that being possible. And the reason being is because I think that when you look at the volume of work and queries that Jean's team and certainly in particular in terms of the critical path of what they've got to deal with closing down multiple years across two authorities, the volume of queries is just too many to get through. Equally, whilst we've split our teams, it'll be rather challenging on our side. You know, we can only work at the pace that the council can. That's no reflection on the council's team at all, because they're doing an absolutely sterling job. I mean, interestingly, you know, you're still got to do 2021 as well, so you were inevitably going to have a lapse period over that year end anyway. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. That's for clarification. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, what's given rise to such a huge volume of queries? That seems to be huge compared to what we normally see, isn't it?
I mean, Chair, I'll take that if that's okay. I mean, I can't really comment on what previous queries the other auditors had. Although, if you look at the elapsed time scale for the close down of that audit, it was over a very elongated period, which would indicate that there was a significant amount of queries which were not resolved. There's a couple of factors that will drive that. Firstly, this is a first-year audit, which inevitably drives more queries than when you're embedded and understand what's going on a little bit more. Secondly, you fall into one of our high risk categories of audit within the sector, which was always going to be the case given where you were previously, and therefore that drops our materiality down and increases the level and volume of testing that we have to undertake.
Stuart, I can see your hand up. Yep.
Just for Councillor Stowe, it's not actually it feels high, but if you look at the complexity of our accounts, the number of assets, transactions, different types of things, and it is actually a learning experience. You know, when you actually look at our balance sheet and consider we're only a shy short of being £1 billion on the balance sheet because of pension funds. So many of the queries will relate to pension fund. They're not necessarily the activities that you see as councillors as our day job. So the pension fund, there's been various legislative changes to that, and we're obligated to answer questions through the pension fund. If you take something like HRA, you know, we've got 11,500 houses, give or take, you know, so there's lots of complexities there. Our actual property portfolio is reasonably sized. We obviously manage Revs and Bens. We are the collection fund for council tax and business rates. So those collection funds are, in very round numbers, about £100 million each. We don't get the money, we collect it, we distribute it to government and other parties. So in the great scheme of things, that's not that many inquiries. It's quite appropriate, and we would have had similar numbers from previous auditors. Just from my own knowledge of different things, they're always unique in what they ask, but yeah, it's not that abnormal.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Sorry, my screen have people's screens gone slightly?
Sorry, Chair, if anybody's screen has gone into speaker mode, you're probably seeing me, which apologies, but you just click around the top and you'll find a gallery view again.
Yeah, thank you. I've gone back to gallery view. Chair, has there been any cases of any significant mismanagement or fraud in what the auditors are looking at? It's one question. The other question is, I'm interested to hear about the process of being a first year audit and then embedded audit, and mindful of the fact that we're being reorganised. So you're never going to be embedded, are you? Because you know what's happening to all the 8 lots of different districts and boroughs auditors and the audit process. What's happening with it at the end of March?
Yeah, so clearly we're the auditors to the other districts as well. So we've got 18, 19, 19, 20, 21, 21 to complete. There is currently a process ongoing for the appointment of auditors for the 21-22 year for the new unitary authorities, and PSAA have clearly asked the unitary authorities if they wish to be part of that process, which I think they've indicated that they do. PSAA are now consulting with the other audit firms as to who would want to take on that appointment, and then who would be the best people to take on that appointment. So that it's quite two distinct processes.
And the risks and mismanagement question?
At the moment, we have not identified any risk, or we have not identified any evidence of mismanagement or fraud from the work that we've undertaken to date.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Stone, yeah, you've got your response there, hopefully. Yeah, it's just to echo what's been said, really. It's closing a set of accounts of the size of Northampton's is not it's not a straightforward task, and that's not just about sort of Northampton history. There is some complexity there. For me, I think the sense I get in terms of the good news is a strong working relationship between Jean's team and Steve's team, and that can only be a good thing. I think we've had quite a number of occasions where we've maybe been disappointed in the past with timelines that have been set and so on, but it feels to me, and I hope I've got this right, that we're on a realistic path in terms of timescale. There will be a challenge in terms of moving over to the new authority, but having the same team and the same auditors, it's not it doesn't make things foolproof, but it certainly gives us, I think, some cause for optimism. So I think that's really helpful. Just conscious of I've gone slightly off script there, but in terms of the report, any other questions that people want to ask of Jean or Stuart or Steve? No? Okay, that's good. Thank you once again for your help on that. We'll no doubt be talking about this in due course, but keep up the good work, and let's hope the next session is a positive one in terms of 18-19 accounts. So thank you for that. If we can move on to the next report, which I think is one for Joe, who's been sat there patiently. Governance report. Joe, do you want to introduce this one for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is the update for the governance. There's 3 appendices for these. So we've got the governance report, we've got temporary workers register, and we have the Q2 2021 corporate risk register to have a look through. So if we start with the governance report on page 49. And the first item is the LGSS contract management, which Stuart's already covered. So LGSS no longer exists. So that's been broken down into the 3 county that are delivering the services through to unitary for us. Risk registers, we have a Brexit risk register, the COVID risk registers, and the corporate risk registers, all of which we try and keep as up to date as possible. Obviously, the Brexit one is an ongoing one, and we'll probably have more focus on that come the end of December into January, depending on what government decide. Emergency planning is obviously still going on with the COVID, so we're involved with the county, heavily involved with county with the COVID. Also with the LRF, which is the Local Resilience Forum. Some staff have been redeployed, some staff are still doing the day jobs, but I think everybody in NBC is trying to work closely with the county so we can, deliver the services that we need to for emergency planning. Temporary worker register we've got on the next document, so Appendix 2. The next section, which is number 5, is health and safety. So that does give you some statistics for 2021 and the 1920 statistics underneath that. It also shows the type of accident incident broken down. Section 6 is GDPR, so any breaches that we have within the council have been detailed there. And just at the end of that, we've got some just other things that the governance and risk team have been working on. Are there any questions before we go on to the workers register, temporary workers register? No.
Not seen any, Joe. Carry on.
Okay. Register for temporary workers. This is updated by Karen Middleton. And as you can see, from April 20 down to November 20, it's dropped from 21 down to 12. So it's still something that we're looking at to make sure that we haven't got any unnecessary temporary workers in place. Do we have any questions on the temporary worker register?
Joe, can I just ask one on that? In terms
of
contractual positions, and I'm not talking about any particular individual, but will those people end their employment at the 31st of March or before, or are some of those moving into West Northants? I can see Stuart's got his hand up there. I don't know if he's in a better position than you on this one.
Yeah.
With my multi-hat role of HR, CFO, governance risk, in terms of contractual, we have a number of people that are just helping us to the 31st of March. Anybody that's going to cross over, we have active engagement with the New West. So we're not prevented from hiring people now to cross over, but we seek agreement because we're passporting future cost. It also then depends on how they're going to blend and pool resources going forward as well. So some are very temporary agency workers where we've got specific purposes. Somewhere like some of our housing colleagues where we get a grant for a specific 12-week exercise, we sometimes will use agency staff for a very specific purpose. we have some other services where we need a short and sharp agency backfill. Those with longer contracts, and we are negotiating each individually if they're on a fixed term contract as to does it have to end by the 31st of March, or for the very reasons Councillor Stone and others have highlighted, do we need them to cross over because actually we need that intelligence and capacity to help launch the unitary. So each one is looked at on its merits.
Thank you, Steve. Joe?
Okay, Councillor Stone, did you have a question?
They've just all been answered. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move on to the corporate risk register, which is on page 57, which shows the risk map as it currently is. This will be updated in Q3 with discussions with the directors and service heads, just to evaluate the current status of each one of them. So any changes in that will be updated at the next audit committee. Following that, on page 57, we have on page 59 a start of the corporate risk register, which goes through, I think we have 18 in total on there. The Brexit one obviously is a separate one now, so that's been taken off there, as is the COVID one. So are there any questions from anyone on the corporate risk register?
Joe, can I just ask one, which is a general one?
Yeah.
Which I'm confident you can explain away, because we've had discussions on this before. When we put on page 57 the risks there, and my eyes always go to the ones in the sort of top right hand corner. So we've got issues like position regarding a balanced budget and making decisions that may not stand up to legal challenge and so on. I think I'm right in saying that these are at that point of before any sort of mitigating controls are put into place. It just worries me that someone reads that particular box of information and gets a slightly distorted view. Could you say just a bit more on that?
Yeah, I would say that some of these are based on historic information. And as I say, we are going to be updating it in Q3 because it could do with a review, I feel. So there's some of the ones, especially the, to deliver a balanced budget, that could be, quite have a big impact on the council. So we tend to be a little bit, I suppose we'll probably put them in a higher risk category, if you like, than just saying that everything's okay, because ultimately, if you have everything in the green and ambers, it's not really going to be flagged up, and it's not really going to, cause anyone to question anything that's on there. So we do tend to be a little bit more, I don't know what the word is, but just make sure that, it is highlighted.
No, thank you for that. That's really helpful. And if you are planning to bring something back later, that would be useful, not just for us, but I think it also plays to that point we've touched on a few times tonight about what the new council can see from the Northampton position. So that would be useful. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Have you got more to say on your report, or are you looking for questions?
No, looking for questions now. It's really if everybody's had time to look through the corporate risk register and if there's any questions coming out of that.
Okay, that's fine. I'm not seeing any hands at the moment. No, so thank you for
I find it quite reassuring, actually, Chair. I've seen a much worse risk register in the past. This looks like progress.
Good. There's a backhanded compliment if ever I heard it. Yeah. Very good. So thank you for that, Joe. It is appreciated. Okay, thanks. Let's move on to the next item, which I think is Treasury Management, where we've got Stuart and Jean doing a double act, or is it Jean that's starting again? It's Jean that's starting again, according to Stuart's head. So Jean, could you present this one for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As with previous Treasury Management reports, the report's been developed in conjunction with advice from the Council's specialist advisors, Link Asset Services, who specialise in this area with local government. The outturn update, which is the first part of the report for 1920, this reporting period does include the initial impact of the coronavirus pandemic in March 2020 and reflects the turbulent markets seen at that time. At a local level, the council had ensured that its surplus cash was placed in financial instruments that weren't exposed to the immediate risks that presented in the financial markets at that point. And hence the return on investments compared favourably to the relevant benchmarks throughout the year, with a return of 1.28% achieved at the end of the year. The council remained within its agreed parameters for treasury management as set out in table 3 of the report, and the council's level of borrowing reflects the agreed capital expenditure plans during the year, built in with the best use of the market conditions. That's really all the 1920 story as such, and I will hand over to Stuart if he wants to add anything about 1920, or if there are any questions before we move on to 2021.
Okay, let's open it up for questions. Any points at this? Any questions at this point for Jean? No, I'm not seeing any. Jean, do you want to continue, please?
Right. Okay. So for the mid-year update for 2021, the second section of the report, that outlines the position to date where the impact of the coronavirus pandemic has continued to be felt. A detailed briefing note from the Treasury Management Advisors has been appended to the report for you to view. Members will be aware that the Bank of England base rate has been historically low levels, which it has been for a long time, but even more historically low levels since it was reduced to 0.1% in March. The Council has continued to invest surplus cash during the year and has balanced the level of cash held against its borrowings to reduce where possible the need to bear the cost of carrying additional borrowing. The surplus cash invested has achieved an above a benchmark return, largely due to the return made on the investment held in the CCLA property fund. In the year to date, the outstanding borrowing has decreased in line with scheduled annuity loan repayments, and the need to take out new borrowings will be driven primarily by capital expenditure plans over the next few months. And plans are in place to obtain additional borrowing to reflect the capital programme. The Council continues to operate within its Treasury and prudential indicators as set out in the approved strategy. And happy to take any further questions on that.
Okay, thanks, Jean. Stuart, sorry, did I see your hand up there? Yeah.
So that's the technical thing, and it sounds very innocuous, and we're doing great. So just for my purposes, we have a treasury management team, we have the external advisors, and we've got the finance business partner team, all of whom are working exceptionally hard in that mid-year review. It completely ignores the fact that what COVID's done to us is severely damaged some of our income streams by millions. And we've had to manage the treasury management and cash flow because we're obligated to pay the precepts to parishes, the county, fire, police. So we've had to manage our cash flow very carefully to make sure we pay them because we are the collecting authority. The government has invited us to distribute millions in business grants, and sometimes the promises and the requests to distribute have come in advance of the millions that were due, so we've had to be very cautious with that. It's been quite a tricky time for the Treasury group because we wouldn't normally carry so much cash in short-term investments, but as you're aware, when we did the first lockdown, we were pushing out 35 million in 12 to 16 weeks. That's a lot of cash coming in and going back out again. In addition to that, most councillors here will be aware we have a very Interesting. Challenging capital programme for HRA. So we have been, as you're aware, through Cabinet, approving various schemes. I tend to average them out at 10 million each. There's some up, some down. So again, Treasury Management's had to have a quite an interesting time keeping an eye on me and my colleagues on what commitments we're making through Cabinet. So in terms of liquidity and cash flow, it's been a pretty tricky year for them because the sums of money are flying in and flying out at quite a rate. So just you know, it sounds innocuous, but it's been a very, very challenging year for all of the finance team trying to do that.
Okay, thanks.
But it looks extremely well managed, if I may say so. I've read the Treasury Management report. I always find it really interesting, and it looks incredibly well managed to me. So thank you.
They keep me on my toes.
Right, thanks for that, Councillor Stone. I suppose my first question is, I don't know when Jean sleeps, but that was only came to me as you were talking about all the work you've done on this and the final account. So again, a big thank you to you and your team on that. Can I just ask a couple of questions? And it may be that these are very technical, and so you might need to come back to me in due course as per the previous meeting on this. But perhaps a general one to start with. In terms of the 21-22 Treasury Management Strategy and also the 2021 outturn, will they fall into the period post 31st of March, Jean?
That would be my understanding. The Treasury Management team sit to the side of me and we report sort of jointly to the Assistant Director for Financial Operations at the county. So I'm covering for my colleague this evening who's unable to be with us. But yes, that would be my understanding.
Okay. And then a couple of specifics. You touched on the council's investment into the CCLA property fund, and you said the report is positive about the return there. I just wondered if you knew offhand what the return was, and either yourself or Stuart.
It tends to be 4.5%.
Yeah.
4.5. Okay. All right.
And as we were actively supported by Councillor Stone that's why she's smiling. So there was a general consensus of this was a good thing to do, and we still maintain it was a good thing to do. Thank you.
And a slightly more general, but still in the technical area. On page 75, you talk about loan restructuring and when the markets are favourable, looking at which long-term loans that the council have got that could be restructured. I suppose my question is, I would have thought despite all the work that's going on at the moment, that the market conditions are perhaps favourable at the moment to do that sort of thing. Is that fair? I've got Jean and Stuart. I don't know.
I'll defer to Stuart.
So Jean's fronting the report very kindly for another colleague in her team, B,
okay,
who is our Treasury advisor. Jean is doing an incredibly good job of delivering that, but she's not necessarily. She is very aware of Treasury functions. We are actively looking at all the rates, in particular the refinancing bit at the moment. We're looking around HRA. We have a large loan portfolio through PWLB for the HRA, and as all councillors are keen for us to keep building, but also to try to keep the rental cost as low as possible. We are actively looking at our loan portfolio to see whether we can replace some due loans with a slightly higher percent to anything we can get below 1% at the moment. But also we're looking at the profile of, is it 30, 40 or 50 years at these beneficial rates. So less around the general fund, but really focusing on the HRA. Again, we're the only council that has HRA moving into the West. So we do have the blessing of the Section 151 in the West. Obviously wish to be involved and know what we're doing, but in the main, that's where we would look at refinancing.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Councillor Marriott.
Put the mic on, yeah. Given the problems we've had in the past, with the loans to the cobblers, but a table 3 you've got on page 84, the university and the rugby. Given the financial impact that those two organisations had through COVID, are they still going to be okay to pay up what they owe, or is that being delayed in any way? I just wondered if you could give us a clue on that, because that's an area we've had troubles in the past with.
Okay, Stuart.
So, as council aware, we did some time back now, lose track with COVID, consider doing a refreshed loan to the rugby club. As a result of that, we actually did an awful lot of due diligence work to test their ability for a new loan. In doing so, we identified and reconfirmed all of the assets that support the current loan. They're not at risk. We have agreed to defer some capital repayment this year purely on cash flow. So they're still paying their interest payments, but to support them, we've agreed that it's a low risk opportunity to defer the capital repayments for this year to the future year, but they are backed by very good quality assets, land assets that are cashable, and that empowerment goes straight to officers if there was a default, as opposed to perhaps one of the lessons from the past was it wasn't an officer decision to deal with things. So we're in constant communication with Rugby Club. We think they're doing a good job, and we understand their challenges, and we've been supportive without doing anything detrimental to them. In terms of the university, there is a cabinet paper going on Wednesday, which asks for an extension to the repayment of an £8.5 million loan, and that's purely on the basis that that repayment was to be triggered on the basis of 2 site disposals on their behalf. As a result of COVID and some other things, those sites didn't come forward as quickly, so you'll get the full explanation on Wednesday. But again, that is a Treasury guarantee, so all of the loans we have through the university are, I can't say no risk, but as close as you get to it. They are actually Treasury guaranteed, so we're comfortable with that one as well. But we do check all of our partners regularly.
No, well, thanks for that. It's really good to hear that we have been supportive, because lots of people have been really impacted, and it's gone on for a little while yet, I think. Thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions on treasury management? Councillor Stone.
Just a quick one. Thank you for that clarification about those 2 loans. I think that's quite important for us to know, actually. I was interested in the sector report that we looked at earlier, that some, or at least one local authority, is investing in private rental properties. So they're building to rent in the private sector. I'm just wondering, I know we've only got a couple of months left to run, but we've never thought about doing that, have we?
Stuart?
So we have thought about it, but at the time we were thinking about it, we were trying to work out how we could do private sector rental, but with a social conscience, for want of a better phrase. And then fortunately, the government lifted the cap on HRA borrowing, because that's why a lot of people were looking at that as a market. And therefore our preference now is to purely focus on HRA builds, and all of our rents, although we call it affordable rent, it's based around the local housing allowance. So the principle there is, if someone did lose their job, they would get a housing benefit to that level. So that's why we try to focus on that. We have considered commercial residential, but we're not sure it was ever really, if we got a preference, it would be to go HRA, because that keeps the rents at a better way. Not so keen on the general fund being seen to make an income from the people we probably would prefer, and certainly Cabinet would prefer, to house and rent to through the HRA at a better rental. Other councils that don't have HRA would consider that as a sector, because it is a reasonable return, but they can still do it with a degree of social conscience, and sometimes impact on their private sector rental market by offering fair rentals, for want of a better phrase. Certainly it's something that many of the pension funds are looking at now, because in some ways that type of investment is safer than many of the commercial investments. So we may be looking at that as an area, but it does contradict a bit to our HRA plans.
I really agree with what you've just said, and I like that explanation, so thank you for that. But I was thinking about it in terms of the right to buy, because it's kind of a risk, isn't it, when we build really beautiful new houses and we get that rush of good feeling with our tenants and their families, and then all of a sudden those homes are being sold off. That's all I'm thinking.
The difficulty, just to answer that, so the difficulty would be, as a council, we would probably use a commercial vehicle, and if we did a commercial vehicle, we would have to borrow, and then we would have to lend at a premium rate, and so therefore that would create an issue in how much rent you'd have to charge. So in one sense you would protect it from right to buy, but actually the cost nature of that would create challenges as to how low can you keep that rent. So yes, we run risk of right to buy, but we manage to keep the rentals down to local housing allowance. So it is that balance of what's the lesser of the evils, and at the moment our preference is to promote HRA rentals, and yes, I see a lot of media coverage about it's still not necessarily as affordable, but it is a lot more affordable than if we were looking at the commercial market.
Okay. Thank you, Stuart. That's helpful. Any other questions on treasury management? No. Okay. So we can perhaps move on to final report, which I think is back to you, Stuart. I think it's your short Chief Finance Officer report. So perhaps if you can just introduce this for us, please.
It is, and I'd just like to, for all the nice comments that some of the councillors have said about the Treasury risk controls and everything, so I would give complete credit to the management team that support me. So Joe and Karen obviously do all the risk side, all the governance, and they do all the follow-up to the internal audits. Jean is very much in control of the close down for us, and B does a great job on the Treasury. So, I am actively supported by this team that gives you that extra reassurance. So it's not me alone. So for this report, traditionally this is not a normal type of audit committee report, but I tend to pick up all the issues that haven't perhaps been covered by any agenda items. So in the main, the only item left in here is to actually just highlight that the budget is still on track to be balanced for this year. Again, Cabinet will receive its report on Wednesday. All the other normal bits and pieces I would pick up, like Treasury and Statement of Accounts, have actually been agenda items. And I can assure you there's been no accounting policy changes. The only one that I specifically was asked to include was at 3.8.1, KPMG specifically asked that I report the latest bill from them in respect of processing the objection to the accounts from 2015-16. So there is a latest bill directly from KPMG of 17.5k, and the current total cost for that objection is 160,000. In terms of whether we will get a product from their investigations, we're in communication with KPMG, and we await their final decision as to what they would produce or not, and when.
Okay, thank you, Stuart, for that. You've actually answered my question in your introduction, but has anyone else got any other questions there? I should also add that I think there was a page 99 added and 100 added in error that I should have pointed out at the outset of the meeting. But any other questions in terms of Stuart's report? No? I think that's the first one we've not had any questions on tonight, but it must say something about the author, Stuart.
As I said, I think it says something about the team that's answered all the questions in all the other papers on the agenda. I take no credit for that one, Chair.
Absolutely.
Other than giving credit to the deputy chair for spotting that I still had a deliberate typo at 4.5.1 where I mentioned BDO as external auditor when they're internal auditors. So you'll be pleased to know that the committee doesn't just receive papers, they audit me on the papers and spot my typo. So many thanks to the deputy chair, and I have corrected the template.
Yeah,
don't worry, sir. It's not a hanging offence.
No, but my thanks as well. It's, as Stuart's just said, it's useful to have deputies. So thank you, Brian, for that one. That's great.
And I say on what I've heard, I think I'll pass on external audit as well if I have the choice.
No, very wise, very wise.
Great. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of the session. It's been a useful session. I think. I hope you found it useful too. Obviously, we've got some pressure in the new year, and with the final accounts amongst other things. So hopefully we'll be able to see some of that information and have another useful session. Those of you that I don't see before Christmas, enjoy your Christmas. More importantly, stay